Welcome to Sweeter Than Honey. Today's daily devotion is from Genesis chapter 11. Remember that in Genesis chapter 11, Noah and his family have just come off the ark. Then in chapter 10, we're given a table of the nations that are produced out of Noah's sons, their family lineage. And then as we come to chapter 11, there are some men that find a plain, a land of Shinar. And the chapter is easily divided into three different sections. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, is what we call the Tower of Babel. Then chapter 11, verses 10 through 26, we are given the descendants, the lineage of Shem. And then from 27 through 32, the end of the chapter, we are introduced to the family of Terah. And Terah's family is going to produce Abraham, who will become the main character of the remainder of the book. In verses 1 through 9, this tower, this story of Babel, is a transition point. It highlights the recurring problem of depravity and sin that exists within humanity. Because remember, society had gotten so bad that God just wipes out all of society and starts over with Noah's family. Then even after that reboot, that divine reboot of the flood, here now in chapter 11, just 2 chapters after they get off the ark, there is a recurrence of the problem of depravity. The land of Shinar becomes a centralized emphasis of their new civilization. And because they are all able to speak the same language, they are going to begin to set up for themselves a land where they can make a name for themselves. Look at verse 2. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth." Now we're going to compare that statement in chapter 11, verse 4. In chapter 12, that's going to come back into play. But they're trying to centralize the civilization here in the land of Shinar, and the monument that they're going to build to themselves and the attraction that they will use to centralize their civilization is a tower. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing that they plan will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not be able to understand each other." Can you imagine what is about to happen? People are on the scaffolding working on this tower. We theorize that it might be something like a ziggurat, like a stepped pyramid. It was going to be used for religious purposes, perhaps for astronomical purposes, but it was going to be a cultural center for this newly developed civilization. And the purpose of this was so that these men would make a name for themselves. But since they were going to be able to do this, their unity of language was a key component to that. And God comes down, he looks at what they're doing, he doesn't like this, and so he now confuses their language. People working on the tower, men working together, hand me another brick, give me that hammer, give me that chisel, everything that they're speaking in the same language. Then God suddenly comes down and confuses their languages. Some of them are speaking, just imagine our languages. Some of them are suddenly speaking Spanish, some French, some Russian, some Japanese, some English, and nobody can understand one another. And as a missionary, there is a deep frustration when you're trying to communicate to someone and you just can't get them to understand. You think, I'm saying it so clearly, so plainly, and why can you not understand me? And now these men and women that are building this tower, suddenly they can't understand each other, and it was such a night and day experience. Suddenly they're not able to understand each other, where previously, just minutes before perhaps, they understood one another clearly. They get frustrated with one another, frustrated with the process, frustrated with the project, and then finally they all just go their separate ways. This is what God had wanted all along. He had wanted these people to spread around the world and to populate the earth, not to centralize in one location. And he had purposes for that, for the earth to be under their dominion, but they had the plan and the purpose of building a name for themselves. God had told them to do this. They were reluctant. They were building their own name, and that's where the problem lies. God's insistence on his plan over man's plan is not just a moment of discipline and punishment, but it is an act of God's grace when God usurps our plans so that his plan will take precedent. God's plans are always better than ours. Out of his grace to us, he allows us our creative processes, our own projects, but God working in us and through us, he is accomplishing redemption, and he is accomplishing the drawing of all people to himself. As the storyline develops in verse 10, we are introduced to Shem's bloodline, and from 10 to 26, we are told of one generation after another of Shem's descendants. Then when we get to verse 26, we're introduced to Terah. Terah lived 70 years. He became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the account of Terah, and the tightened focus of the passage steps down to where from looking at all of Shem's descendants, we're now looking at Terah, and of Terah's 3 sons, we're going to even tighten the focus even more, and we're going to be looking at Abram for the next several chapters. As Terah is introduced, we're told of, and Haran became the father of Lot. His father Terah was still alive. Haran died, and so they bury him, but the family assumes the responsibility of taking his son Lot. Verse 29, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. And she was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Ishka. Now Sarai was barren, and this barren theme is going to show itself again and again in the Old Testament. Sarai was barren. She had no children. Contemporary families are sometimes okay with this. There are people in our day who choose not to have children, but this was not only a problem back in their agrarian society, but it was also felt in their society and their culture to be shame on the woman. And so her barrenness becomes a big problem. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldees to go to Canaan. So they're going toward what will eventually be called the Promised Land. She had no children. Now, when they came to Haran, they settled there. They didn't make it to Canaan. They just hung around there. He lived 205 years, Terah did, and then he died in Haran. And that is the setup for chapter 12, when we're going to be introduced to Abram as a main character in God's redemptive plan. Some implications here. One, sinful unity can be destructive. Unity we speak highly of, but when people are unified under a sinful idea or a sinful cause, this is added destruction. It is multiplied destruction. Scattering the people of Babel was an act of God's mercy, because it did not took away an inhibition, a roadblock for God's redemptive plan. Number 3, The human society had already begun to spiral deeper into sin, and God was doing what he could to accelerate his redemptive plan. God works in and through real historic events. God chooses imperfect and damaged people like Terah and Nahor and Lot and now Abram. God prepares people for his call. Abram is an adult. God is working on him through his circumstances, through various things that are happening in him. God is working on Abram, and we'll pick up with that tomorrow. May God bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you.